Rain drifts steadily outside, turning the world into a softer place. You're listening to Made for Sleep, where history unfolds slowly and without urgency. Tonight, we explore why everyone thinks dinosaurs vanished overnight, and how their story actually unfolded gradually, shaped by time rather than a single moment. Let the rain set the rhythm as the past drifts by. And if you'd like, let me know how you're doing in the comments, and what time it is where you're listening from. You're standing in a forest that would make any modern jungle seem almost barren by comparison. The air around you hangs thick and warm, carrying the scent of wet bark and decomposing vegetation, that rich, earthy smell intensified 100-fold. Above your head, the canopy stretches so high that the individual leaves blur into a green haze, and shafts of golden light pierce through like spotlights on a stage. This is the late Cretaceous period, about 70 million years ago, and you're witnessing an ecosystem functioning at the peak of its complexity. A herd of Edmontosaurus moves through the undergrowth to your left, their duckbills methodically stripping leaves from low-hanging branches. They move with surprising grace for animals the size of large trucks, their footfalls creating a gentle rhythm against the forest floor. One of them pauses to scratch its flank against a tree trunk, sending a shower of bark fragments tumbling down. The temperature hovers around 85 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent and stable year-round. There's no winter here, no autumn chill to prepare for. The seasons exist, but they're measured in subtle shifts of rainfall rather than dramatic temperature swings. During the wetter months, shallow seas creep inland, creating vast coastal wetlands where different communities of dinosaurs gather. In the drier times, these areas contract, but they never truly disappear. You notice a Triceratops family browsing nearby, their massive frill shields catching the dappled sunlight. The youngest one, still small enough that its horns are mere bumps, stays close to its mother's flank. They're eating cycads, those palm-like plants with thick trunks and stiff, waxy fronds. The sound of their chewing is surprisingly loud, a constant crunch and tear that forms the background music of this world. Overhead, a Quetzalcoatlus glides past, its wingspan wider than a small airplane's. It's not flapping, doesn't need to. The warm air rising from the sun-heated earth provides all the lift it requires. You watch its shadow slide across the forest floor, momentarily darkening the Edmontosaurus herd, which doesn't even bother to look up. They've seen this shadow 1,000 times before. The balance here isn't peaceful in any sentimental sense. A pack of smaller theropods, Dromaeosaurus, each about the size of a wolf, work together to separate a juvenile hadrosaur from its group. It's calculated, efficient, and over quickly. Nature's accounting system, keeping populations in check. Within an hour, a swarm of beetles and other insects will have started their work on the remains. By tomorrow, only scattered bones will mark where it happened. But here's what strikes you most: the sheer abundance. Everywhere you look, something is eating, growing, reproducing, or decomposing. The biomass of this world exceeds anything you've ever experienced. A single acre of this forest contains more animal life than 10 acres of modern rainforest. The flowering plants, relatively new arrivals on the evolutionary scene, have exploded into countless varieties, and with them have come new species of insects, which in turn support new species of small mammals and lizards. You walk to the edge of a river, its waters murky with sediment from recent rains upstream. A group of Parasaurolophus stands belly deep in the water, their distinctive curved crests creating haunting calls that echo across the landscape. They're communicating, but not in any way that suggests alarm. Just the ordinary conversation of a species comfortable in its environment. The water teems with life too. Turtles the size of coffee tables bask on half-submerged logs. Fish you can't identify from any modern species dart between the dinosaurs' legs, feeding on particles stirred up from the riverbed. A crocodilian relative, longer than your car, watches from the shallows with eyes that break the water's surface like periscopes. It's patient. It's been patient for millions of years. This ecosystem has been refining itself for longer than you can properly imagine. The ancestors of these creatures emerged in the Triassic period, more than 200 million years ago. Since then, they've survived planetary upheavals, sea level changes, and the breakup of supercontinents. They've adapted to ice ages and global hothouse conditions. They've evolved into forms that fly, swim, and dominate every terrestrial niche from pole to pole. As evening approaches, the light takes on a honey-coloured quality. The sounds shift too. Daytime species settle into roosting spots while nocturnal creatures begin their preparations. You hear the distant call of a tyrannosaur, not the Hollywood roar, but something deeper, more resonant, like an enormous drum being struck underwater. It's not hunting yet, just announcing its presence, marking territory in a language older than mountains. The stars begin to emerge, and they're different from the ones you know. Constellations that won't exist for millions of years, arrangements of light that will shift as continents drift, and the Earth continues its patient rotation. But tonight, in this moment, everything seems eternal. This world feels like it could last forever, balanced and perfect in its ancient complexity. You're back in the same forest, but something has shifted. At first, you can't quite identify what's different. The Edmontosaurus are still here. The Triceratops still browse the cycads. The temperature feels the same against your skin, that familiar 85-degree embrace. But then you notice, the wet season lasted 3 weeks longer this year, and the dry season that followed wasn't quite as dry as it should have been. This is 10,000 years after your first visit. A blink in geological time, barely a footnote in the grand story of Earth. Yet for the creatures living through it, these 10,000 years represent 400 generations of adaptation, of slight adjustments to changing conditions. The forest looks the same, but if you examined it closely, you'd find subtle differences in which plants thrive and which struggle. The rainfall patterns are becoming less predictable. Some years dump twice the expected amount of water, flooding lowland nesting sites and drowning eggs that were laid in traditionally safe locations. Other years bring drought that lasts just long enough to stress the vegetation, making certain plants flower at the wrong time or not at all. The dinosaurs adjust, of course. They're remarkably adaptable. But adjustment requires energy, and energy that goes toward coping with change is energy that doesn't go toward growth, reproduction, or storing fat reserves. You watch a herd of hadrosaurs migrating earlier than they would have a few thousand years ago. They're following the rain now rather than the calendar. Their internal clocks, set by millions of years of consistent seasonal patterns, are beginning to conflict with external reality. Some individuals migrated in the old time, some in the new. The herd fractures, becoming less cohesive. Smaller groups are more vulnerable to predators. The ocean temperatures are rising too, though the change is measured in fractions of a degree per millennium. The warm water holds less oxygen, and the great marine reptiles, mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, find themselves swimming deeper, working harder to catch fish that have also moved to cooler depths. The coral reefs that line the shallow seas begin to show signs of stress, their colours slightly less vibrant. Fast forward another 20,000 years. You're standing in what feels like the same spot, but the cycads that dominated the understory have thinned noticeably. Flowering plants have moved into the gaps, but they're different species than before, ones that tolerate more variable moisture conditions. The triceratops are still here, still eating, but you notice they're spending more time selecting their food, passing over plants they would have eagerly consumed before. The volcanic activity has increased. Not dramatically, there's no single catastrophic eruption to point to, but across the globe, the number of active volcanoes has slowly multiplied. In what will one day be India, massive lava flows are beginning to build what geologists will call the Deccan Traps. Each eruption adds another layer of basalt, and each eruption releases gases into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels are creeping upward. The greenhouse effect intensifies slightly, holding more heat close to the Earth's surface. The polar regions, which maintained ice caps for millions of years, see those ice sheets retreat. Sea levels rise incrementally, redrawing coastlines, turning peninsulas into islands, and flooding the shallow inland seas even further. You notice something odd about the light. On some days there's a haziness to the air that wasn't there before. Volcanic aerosols, tiny particles of sulfur and ash, scatter sunlight differently, creating spectacular sunsets, but also reducing the overall clarity of midday illumination. Plants photosynthesize slightly less efficiently. The difference is small, maybe 5%, but across an entire global ecosystem, 5% compounds into something significant. The large herbivores begin showing subtle changes in their behavior. They feed longer each day to compensate for the decreased nutritional value in their food. This means less time for social bonding, less time for careful selection of mates, and less time for the elaborate courtship displays that some species developed over millions of years. Evolution starts favouring efficiency over complexity. Another 50,000 years pass. You're now about 1 million years before the end of the Cretaceous period. The changes are no longer subtle. The forest around you has a different character, more open, with larger gaps in the canopy where old giants have fallen and younger trees haven't quite filled the space. The variety of plant species has decreased noticeably. Where there might have been 30 different types of ferns in a given area, now there are 20. The Edmontosaurus herds have grown smaller, not because of predation, but because the carrying capacity of the land has diminished. There's still plenty of food, but it's not quite as nutritious, not quite as abundant in the specific nutrients that massive bodies require. The juveniles take longer to reach adult size. Sexual maturity comes later. Fewer eggs are laid each season, and fewer of those eggs hatch successfully. The temperature swings have become more pronounced. What used to be a stable 85 degrees now fluctuates between 75 and 95 depending on the season. 10 degrees might not sound like much, but for creatures that evolved in stability, whose metabolisms are tuned to narrow ranges, it represents a constant stress. The cold-blooded reptiles struggle most, but even the dinosaurs, whose metabolism fell somewhere between modern reptiles and mammals, feel the strain. You notice that the Quetzalcoatlus you see now are slightly smaller than their ancestors. Not dramatically, but measurably. Large body size becomes a liability when food is less reliable. Evolution begins favouring individuals who can make do with less, who mature faster, and who reproduce younger. The magnificent giants who took decades to reach full size find themselves at a disadvantage. The ocean currents are shifting as the continents continue their slow dance. Cold water that used to well up along certain coasts, bringing nutrients that fed vast schools of fish, now follows different paths. The marine food chains reorganize. Some species of ammonites, those spiral-shelled swimmers that had flourished for hundreds of millions of years, begin to decline. Not disappear, not yet, but their numbers thin. Standing here in this changing world, you can see that it's still beautiful, still functional, still teeming with life. The dinosaurs still dominate, the great herds still migrate, predators still hunt, but the margin for error has shrunk. The buffer that allowed species to weather bad years, to survive local catastrophes and population crashes, has grown thinner. The ecosystem isn't collapsing, but it's becoming less resilient, less able to absorb shocks, and the shocks you sense are coming. You're standing at the edge of a marsh that didn't exist during your first visit. The land here has subsided slightly, not from any sudden earthquake, but from the gradual settling that comes with changing sea levels and shifting sediment. What was once solid forest floor now squelches beneath your feet, and the trees that grew here have given way to reeds and water-loving plants. This is 100,000 years before the end. The ecosystem hasn't collapsed, but it has fundamentally reorganized itself. The food webs you observed in your first visit has been rewired, with new connections forming and old ones severing. The consequences ripple through every level of life. The flowering plants have taken over. Where ferns and cycads once dominated, now magnolia-like trees and primitive relatives of modern roses and lilies create the canopy. This shift happened gradually enough that herbivorous dinosaurs adapted their diets, but not all species adapted equally well. The ceratopsians, the family that includes triceratops, handle the change better than most. Their beaks and dental batteries evolved to process tough plant material, and flowers and seeds fit nicely into their dietary repertoire. But the long-necked sauropods are struggling. Their massive bodies were optimized for processing huge quantities of relatively low nutrition ferns and conifers. The new plants are more nutritious per bite, but they require different feeding strategies. A creature with a neck 40 feet long can't easily browse the low-growing flowering plants. You see fewer sauropods now, and the ones you do see are smaller species, more adaptable in their feeding habits. This creates a cascade. The largest sauropods were ecosystem engineers. Their feeding habits shaped the structure of forests. Their migrations created pathways that other species used, and their dung fertilized vast areas and dispersed seeds across hundreds of miles. As their numbers decline, the forests change again. Areas that were kept clear by their browsing fill in with dense undergrowth. Species that depended on open woodland find their habitat shrinking. The insect populations have exploded. The flowering plants and insects evolved together in a feedback loop of mutual dependence. Plants offering nectar and pollen, insects providing pollination. But with more insects come more insect eaters. Small mammals, which spent most of the Mesozoic era as mouse-sized nocturnal creatures, are diversifying into new forms. You spot one now, about the size of a modern raccoon, digging for beetle larvae in rotting wood. Its ancestors would have been terrified of even the smallest dinosaurs. This one barely glances at the Edmontosaurus walking past. The predator-prey dynamics are shifting too. The great tyrannosaurs are still apex predators, but their hunting strategies have to adapt to changing prey distributions. Herds that once congregated in predictable locations now scatter across wider territories, following unpredictable rainfall and plant growth. Hunting success rates decline. More energy must be expended per kill. This affects their breeding success. Tyrannosaurs, like many large predators, have relatively few offspring. Each egg represents a significant investment of energy, and raising juveniles to independence takes years. When food becomes less reliable, the mathematics of reproduction shift. Fewer eggs are laid. More juveniles starve during their first year. The population doesn't crash. These are resilient animals, but it contracts slowly and steadily. You walk along the new marsh's edge and notice something else. The diversity has decreased, but the remaining species exist in greater numbers. This is a pattern you'll see throughout the ecosystem. Where there might have been 10 species of small theropods, now there are 6, but those 6 are more abundant. Evolution favours generalists who can adapt to changing conditions over specialists who excel in stable ones. The pterosaurs are perhaps the most visibly affected. Their mastery of the skies is being challenged by the earliest true birds, which evolved from small theropod dinosaurs millions of years earlier. Birds, with their more efficient respiratory systems and more advanced flight capabilities, compete increasingly successfully for the same ecological niches. The largest pterosaurs remain unchallenged. No bird can match a Quetzalcoatlus for sheer size, but the medium-sized species find themselves squeezed between birds above them on the evolutionary ladder and below them in efficiency. In the oceans, the changes are even more dramatic. The shallow inland seas are retreating as sea levels fall. These seas were incredibly productive ecosystems, nurseries for countless species of fish, ammonites, and marine reptiles. As they shrink, they fragment into isolated bodies of water. Populations that could once interbreed find themselves separated. Genetic diversity decreases. Species that depended on the vast extent of these seas find their habitat literally disappearing beneath them. The coral reefs are bleaching more frequently. They recover, but each recovery takes longer and is less complete than the last. The fish populations that depend on the reefs decline. The mosasaurs that hunt those fish must range further to find prey. Energy expenditure increases while food intake decreases. Never a sustainable equation. You notice the sounds have changed. The chorus of calls that filled the Cretaceous forest has grown thinner. There are fewer voices and less variety. The Parasaurolophus still make their haunting calls, but you hear them less frequently. Communication between distant herds has become more difficult as populations fragment, and individuals spread out in search of adequate food. The nesting colonies have shrunk too. Many dinosaur species were communal nesters, gathering in traditional sites that might have been used for thousands of years. But those sites depended on stable conditions, specific soil temperatures, reliable food sources nearby, and protection from flooding. As conditions become less predictable, the communal nesting tradition breaks down. More dinosaurs nest in isolation, and isolated nests are more vulnerable to predators and weather. Standing here, watching a smaller herd of hadrosaurs pick their way through the marsh, you realize you're witnessing something profound. The ecosystem isn't dying. That word's too dramatic, too sudden. It's transforming, but the transformation is taking it towards simplification rather than complexity. The intricate web of relationships that took millions of years to develop is unraveling, thread by thread. The individual animals seem healthy enough. That Triceratops drinking from the marsh shows no obvious signs of distress, but the population as a whole is shrinking, fragmenting, and losing the genetic diversity that allows species to adapt to future changes. They're using up their evolutionary savings account, drawing down reserves that won't be replenished. And you sense, standing here in this quieter world, that the ecosystem has lost its resilience. It's become brittle. A healthy ecosystem can absorb shocks, droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions, and bounce back. This one has used up its capacity to absorb shocks. It's like a person who's been sick for months. They look okay, they're still going to work, still functioning, but they're one bad flu season away from serious trouble. The bad flu season, is coming. You've arrived at a moment 66,100,000 years ago. The sky above you has taken on a peculiar quality. Not dark exactly, but muted, as if you're viewing the world through tinted glass. The sun still rises and sets, but its light seems filtered, diffused, and less vital than before. The volcanic activity has intensified. Across the globe, but especially in the massive province that will become the Deccan region of India, volcanoes are erupting with increasing frequency. These aren't the explosive, mountain-shattering eruptions that will one day destroy Pompeii. They're effusive eruptions where lava flows steadily from fissures in the Earth's crust, spreading across the landscape like slow-moving floods of molten rock. Each eruption releases more than just lava. Sulfur dioxide rises in tremendous quantities, reaching the stratosphere, where it combines with water vapor to form aerosols, tiny droplets of sulfuric acid suspended in the upper atmosphere. These aerosols reflect sunlight back into space, creating a gradual dimming effect. The temperature drops slightly, maybe 2 or 3 degrees on average, but the reduction in direct sunlight affects plants immediately. You're standing in a forest that feels subdued. The plants are still photosynthesizing and still growing, but more slowly. Leaves are slightly smaller, and colors are slightly less vibrant. The flowering plants that revolutionize the ecosystem are producing fewer blooms. The insects that depend on those flowers are declining. The cascade continues upward through every layer of the food web. The hadrosaurs you observe are feeding almost constantly now, trying to compensate for the reduced nutritional content of their food. A plant grown under optimal sunlight packs more energy into its tissues than one grown under dim conditions. The difference might be 10 or 15%, but over months and years that deficit accumulates. The dinosaurs are slowly starving on full stomachs. You notice the younger individuals most acutely. A juvenile Edmontosaurus that should be half-grown after 2 years is noticeably smaller, its growth stunted by inadequate nutrition. It's not sick, there's no disease to point to, but it's not thriving either. And not thriving in nature's ruthless accounting is often functionally equivalent to dying. The seasons have become more extreme. The dim sunlight affects different latitudes differently, disrupting the atmospheric circulation patterns that drive weather. Some regions experience unprecedented droughts while others flood. The dinosaurs, who evolved their migration patterns over millions of years to follow predictable seasonal changes, find themselves arriving at traditional feeding grounds to discover the food isn't there, or it's already been consumed by herds that arrived early due to their own climate-driven desperation. The acid rain has begun. Those sulfur aerosols eventually fall back to Earth, carried down by precipitation. The rain itself becomes slightly acidic, not battery acid caustic, but enough to affect sensitive species. Amphibians and freshwater fish suffer first. The insects that spend part of their life cycle in water decline. Again, the cascade ripples upward. You watch a triceratops herd bunched together beneath a rocky overhang, waiting out a rainstorm. Their behavior seems normal enough, but if you could measure the pH of that rain, you'd find it's more acidic than any rainfall their ancestors experienced. The water running off the rocks carries dissolved minerals at concentrations that will, over time, alter the soil chemistry of the entire region. The forest floor is changing. The layer of organic matter, fallen leaves, dead wood, and decomposing plants, seems thinner than before. The decomposers, the beetles and fungi and bacteria that break down dead material and return nutrients to the soil, are stressed by the changing chemistry. Nutrients cycle more slowly. The soil becomes less fertile. Plants grow even more poorly, and the spiral tightens. 50,000 years pass. You're now just 16,000 years before the end, though you don't know that yet. The skies have darkened further. Some days the sun appears as a pale disk, behind a veil of atmospheric haze. The temperature fluctuates wildly. Cold snaps that would have been unthinkable a million years ago, followed by brief periods of intense heat, as the greenhouse gases continue to accumulate despite the cooling effect of the aerosols. The dinosaur populations have contracted significantly. You're seeing perhaps a tenth of the individuals you observed during your first visit. The great herds have fragmented into small scattered groups. The Edmontosaurus family you're watching now numbers only 12 individuals, what would once have been a herd of hundreds. They're the survivors, the lucky ones whose genetics or circumstances allowed them to cope better than others, but even the survivors are struggling. You notice signs of malnutrition, prominent ribs on the herbivores and a certain lethargy in their movements. The Triceratops you observe has an infection in one of its horns, probably from a fight over increasingly scarce resources. In better times, its immune system would have fought off the infection easily. Now, compromised by chronic stress and poor nutrition, the infection is winning. The predators are desperately hungry. A pack of Dromaeosaurus takes down a young hadrosaur, and instead of the efficient kill you witnessed during your first visit, it's a prolonged, messy affair. The predators are weak too, their reaction slower, their coordination imperfect. After the kill, they defend the carcass more aggressively than necessary, fighting among themselves over scraps. Scarcity breeds desperation. The smaller animals, the mammals, the birds and the lizards are faring somewhat better. Their lower energy requirements and faster reproductive cycles allow them to adapt more quickly to changing conditions. You spot more mammals now than you've seen before, foraging in broad daylight, no longer restricting themselves to nocturnal activity. The dinosaurs, weakened and distracted by their own survival struggles, pose less threat. The pterosaurs are nearly gone. You haven't seen one in hours. The larger species, which required vast quantities of food to maintain their enormous bodies and power their flight, couldn't sustain themselves as food chains collapsed. The medium-sized species lost their competitive edge to birds. Only a few species persist, and those in dwindling numbers. In the oceans, the situation is even more dire. The marine reptiles, those magnificent mosasaurs and plesiosaurs that ruled the seas for millions of years, are starving. The fish populations they depended on have crashed as the base of the marine food web. Plankton and algae struggled under dimmed sunlight and changing ocean chemistry. The ammonites, those graceful spiral-shelled cephalopods, are disappearing. Species that numbered in the billions just 100,000 years ago are now rare finds. You stand on a beach, or what used to be a beach. The ocean has retreated, leaving behind exposed mudflats studded with the shells of dead mollusks. The smell of decay hangs heavy in the air. Small scavengers pick through the remains, but there's a furtiveness to their movements, an urgency born of uncertainty about where the next meal will come from. The light has a strange quality at sunset. The volcanic aerosols scatter light in unusual ways, painting the sky in shades of red and purple that would be beautiful if they didn't signify such devastation. You watch as a lone Quetzalcoatlus glides past, silhouetted against the crimson clouds. It might be one of the last of its kind, though neither you nor it knows that. The world hasn't ended. Life continues, The fundamental processes, photosynthesis, predation and decomposition, still function. But the abundance, the exuberance, and the overwhelming vitality you witnessed during your first visit have drained away. What remains feels like an ecosystem running on fumes, drawing down the last of its reserves with no prospect of replenishment. The dinosaurs themselves seem almost ghostly now, shadows of their former glory, persisting through momentum and evolutionary inertia in a world that has fundamentally changed around them. They're not fighting extinction. That would imply a battle, an active resistance. They're simply trying to survive one more day, one more season, in an environment that grows more hostile with each passing year. And then, on an ordinary morning 66 million years ago, the sky catches fire. You're standing in Mexico, on what will one day be called the Yucatan Peninsula. The date is precise in a way that geological time rarely allows. 66 million years ago, give or take a few thousand years. It's a morning like many others in this stressed but still functioning ecosystem. The sky is overcast with volcanic haze, the temperature cool for this latitude. A small herd of hadrosaurs feeds on the beach vegetation, their duck bills methodically stripping seeds from low shrubs. Then you see it. The asteroid is visible for perhaps 30 seconds before impact, a point of light in the southern sky that brightens impossibly fast, growing from a star-like speck to a blazing sphere that hurts to look at. It's travelling at 45,000 miles per hour, a rock 6 miles in diameter that left the asteroid belt millions of years ago, and has now, through the blind mathematics of orbital mechanics, intersected with Earth's path around the Sun. The hadrosaurs notice the brightening sky. Some of them look up, a gesture that will be their last. Others continue feeding, unaware that the world they know has 30 seconds left to exist. The impact occurs offshore in the shallow sea. You don't see the moment of contact, your eyes couldn't process it even if you tried. What you experience is a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, and then, actually there is no "and then" for anything within 1,000 miles. The energy released exceeds all of humanity's nuclear weapons detonated simultaneously by a factor of 1,000. The asteroid vaporizes instantly, along with millions of tons of rock from the Earth's crust. A crater 12 miles deep and 100 miles wide excavates itself in less time than it takes to read this sentence. The hadrosaurs on the beach cease to exist. Not killed, existence simply revoked. The thermal pulse incinerates them before their nervous systems can register heat. The shockwave that follows, travelling faster than sound, pulverizes what's left. Within seconds, nothing remains of them, or of any living thing within 500 miles of the impact site, but you're observing from a safe distance, 1,000 miles away in what will become Texas. Even here the effects are immediate and devastating. The sky lights up as if someone turned on a cosmic floodlight. The horizon glows orange-red. The temperature spikes 20 degrees in less than a minute. Then the shockwave arrives. It's not the crushing, building-flattening blast you might imagine from a bomb. This is a planetary-scale phenomenon, an atmospheric wave that encircles the globe. Trees bend horizontally, their trunks flexing to impossible angles before snapping. A triceratops herd are knocked off their feet like bowling pins. They try to stand, confused and terrified, as debris begins to rain from the sky. The debris is unlike anything in your experience. Molten rock, vaporized by the impact and flung into the upper atmosphere, begins to fall back to Earth. These spherules of once molten material glow cherry red, setting fires wherever they land. The forest around you ignites in hundreds of places simultaneously, Within an hour, the fires have merged into a conflagration that will eventually consume millions of square miles of forest. The Triceratops herd, those that survived the initial shockwave, stampede in panic. There's nowhere to run that isn't burning or about to burn. Some plunge into a nearby river, which offers temporary refuge. Others simply flee until exhaustion or smoke inhalation drops them. The scene is replicated across continents. Animals that survived hundreds of millions of years of evolution, undone in hours. The sky darkens as dust and soot rise into the atmosphere. Not the gradual dimming of volcanic aerosols, but a swift occlusion of sunlight. By nightfall, the darkness is absolute. No stars, no moon, just the orange glow of continent-spanning wildfires reflecting off the dust-choked clouds. Days pass. You're somewhere in North America, watching what survives. Small mammals emerge from underground burrows, confused by the extended darkness. Some dinosaurs have made it through the initial impact, those that were in the right places, in valleys protected from the thermal pulse, near water sources, or simply lucky. A group of Edmontosaurus huddles in a ravine, their bodies pressed together for warmth as the temperature plummets. With no sunlight penetrating the dust cloud, photosynthesis has stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Plants begin to die within weeks. The herbivorous dinosaurs, already stressed by years of difficult conditions, have nothing to eat. They wander through the darkened landscape, stripping bark from trees, digging for roots, and consuming anything remotely edible. You watch an adult Edmontosaurus die. It's not dramatic. The animal simply lies down one afternoon and doesn't get up again. Starvation, hypothermia, or possibly both. Its herd mates investigate the body briefly, then move on. They're focused entirely on their own survival now, and the social bonds that once held herds together have frayed under the pressure of catastrophe. The predators fare even worse. A Tyrannosaurus, apex predator of its ecosystem, reduced to scavenging. It feeds on a dead Triceratops, probably killed by the impact's aftermath. But dead prey doesn't run away, and in this new world, prey that doesn't run away is also prey that won't be replaced. Each carcass consumed brings the predator one meal closer to starvation. Months pass. The darkness persists. Some sunlight begins filtering through the upper atmosphere, but it's diffuse, weak, and unable to support the kind of photosynthesis that fuels complex food webs. The temperature has stabilized, but at a much lower level than before. Water sources freeze at night, even at equatorial latitudes. The large dinosaurs are dying, not all at once, but steadily, inexorably. You find their bodies scattered across the landscape: Triceratops, hadrosaurs, ankylosaurs, and all the magnificent megafauna that defined the Mesozoic. Some died of starvation, others froze. Some probably died of injuries sustained during the chaos following the impact or infections that their weakened bodies couldn't fight off. The smaller species persist longer. Size, which was an advantage for millions of years, has become a liability. Large bodies need large amounts of food, and there isn't any. But small mammals, eating insects and seeds and carrion, can get by on scraps. The early birds, with their high metabolisms but small size, find enough to survive. Lizards and snakes, able to enter torpor and reduce their energy needs, wait out the darkness. A year after the impact, you're standing in a landscape that would be unrecognizable to someone from the previous age. The forests are gone, replaced by a wasteland of dead trees and ash. The air smells of smoke and decay. The rivers run thick with sediment from erosion. Without living plants to hold the soil, every rainfall washes more earth into the streams. You haven't seen a living dinosaur in weeks. A few must still exist, scattered individuals in isolated pockets of marginally better conditions. But as a dominant life form, as the architect of Earth's terrestrial ecosystems, they're gone. 60 million years of evolutionary success ended not by a single blow, but by that blow's cascading consequences. The impact killed millions immediately. The darkness killed billions over months. But it's the long-term effects that truly seal the dinosaurs' fate. The acid rain persisted for years, poisoning water sources and further damaging the already devastated plant life. The greenhouse warming that followed the initial impact winter, as the dust settled but the carbon dioxide released by the impact and by burning forests remained. The ecosystem collapsed that left even the survivors with nothing to eat. Standing here in this broken world, you realize you're witnessing the border between two ages of Earth's history. Behind you lies the Mesozoic era, the age of reptiles, a time when dinosaurs shaped every terrestrial ecosystem from pole to pole. Ahead lies something different, something that will belong to other creatures, to the small mammals sheltering in their burrows and the birds roosting in the dead trees. The transition isn't clean. It's messy, tragic, and desperately unfair to the creatures who did nothing to deserve their fate, except have the misfortune of existing at the wrong moment in cosmic history. But it's also complete. The world that emerges from this darkness will be fundamentally different, and that difference will make possible forms of life, including eventually a species capable of understanding what happened here, that could never have evolved in the dinosaur's shadow. You're standing in the same location, but 5,000 years have passed since the impact. The sky's visible again, not the brilliant blue of the Cretaceous, but a washed-out grey blue, hazy with dust that's still settling. The sun provides light and some warmth, though not yet enough to restore the climate to its pre-impact state. The temperature hovers around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cool but no longer life-threateningly cold. The landscape around you looks like something from an alien planet. Where there used to be dense forest, you see open terrain covered in low-growing plants. Ferns dominate. They're among the first plants to recolonize disturbed areas, their spores surviving conditions that killed seed plants. The ground is carpeted in green, but it's a monotonous green, lacking the diversity you observed before. Small mammals are everywhere. They emerge from burrows and from beneath fallen logs in numbers that would have been impossible when dinosaurs controlled the ecosystem. A creature about the size of a modern possum picks its way through the fern fronds, digging for insects. Another, slightly larger and more robust, investigates a puddle left by recent rain. These mammals aren't dramatically different from their pre-impact ancestors. Evolution doesn't work that quickly, but they're behaving differently, occupying ecological niches that were, until very recently, the exclusive domain of dinosaurs. That possum-sized animal is browsing on ferns in broad daylight, behaviour that would have been suicidally risky 5,000 years ago. Now, with no large predators, it's perfectly safe. Birds are abundant too. You hear their calls, simpler than the complex vocalizations of modern songbirds, but recognisably bird-like. A group of them works over a dead log, extracting beetle larvae with their beaks. Another species, larger and heavier bodied, walks along the shore of what was once an inland sea, but is now a shallow lake. It's probing the mud for small animals, filling the ecological role that shorebirds will perfect over the coming millions of years. You notice something moving in the ferns and freeze, some instinctive part of you expecting a dinosaur. But it's just a large lizard, probably 3 feet long, hunting the same insects the birds are after. It's not a dinosaur, not even close, but in this emptied world, it looks imposing. Give it a few million years, and its descendants might evolve to fill some of the niches the dinosaurs left vacant. The water bodies are recovering faster than the land. Algae bloomed within months of the impact winter ending, and with algae came zooplankton, and with zooplankton came small fish. The ecosystem is rebuilding from the bottom up, starting with the simplest organisms and gradually adding complexity. You spot a turtle, one of the few reptiles to survive the catastrophe largely intact. Turtles, with their ability to survive months without food, were well suited to endure the impact winter. A crocodilian surfaces in the lake, its eyes above water, watching you with ancient patience. Crocodilians made it through as well, their semi-aquatic lifestyle and low metabolism carrying them across the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleocene periods. They're living fossils even now, barely changed from their pre-impact forms. But the dinosaurs, the non-avian dinosaurs, the ones that dominated the terrestrial landscape, are gone. You've searched, walked miles through this recovering ecosystem, and found nothing. No triceratops browsing the ferns, no hadrosaurs in the distance, no tyrannosaurs, no sauropods, no ankylosaurs. The largest land animal you've seen is a mammal the size of a raccoon. The fossil record tells the story clearly. In rock layers deposited before the impact, dinosaur fossils are abundant. In layers deposited after, they simply disappear. There's no gradual decline, no slow fade out. The line is sharp, absolute. Below it, dinosaurs. Above it, their absence. Tens of thousands of years pass. You're now 50,000 years after the impact, and the recovery is more evident. The fern prairies have given way to more diverse plant communities. Early flowering plants have recolonized from refugia, isolated pockets where they survived the impact winter. The forests are returning, though they look different from their Cretaceous predecessors. More open, less dense, and dominated by fast-growing species that can take advantage of disturbed conditions. The mammals are diversifying rapidly. In the absence of large dinosaurian predators, they're exploring ecological space that was closed to them for over 100 million years. You spot a creature about the size of a German shepherd, one of the largest land mammals to exist so far in the Paleocene. It's browsing on low vegetation, filling a role that would have belonged to a small dinosaur before the impact. The pace of evolution has accelerated. When dinosaurs controlled the ecosystems, they were so successful and so well adapted that they limited opportunities for other groups to diversify. Their extinction opened up those opportunities. Mammals, birds, and even some fish and reptile groups are radiating into new forms at an unprecedented rate. You find a fossil from before the impact, a triceratops frill partially weathered but still recognizable. It's embedded in a rock layer that's now at the surface, erosion having removed the sediments deposited on top of it. You run your hand over the bone, feeling the texture of something that was alive just 50,000 years ago. A blink in geological time. Near the fossil, ferns wave in the breeze. A small mammal burrows beneath them, building a nest. An early songbird calls from a nearby shrub. Life has moved on. The world doesn't mourn the dinosaurs, doesn't mourn anything. It simply fills the empty spaces they left behind. 100,000 years after the impact, you're standing in an early Paleocene forest. The trees are taller now, 30 or 40 feet, creating a closed canopy in places. The plant diversity has increased dramatically. Dozens of flowering plant species and various ferns and horsetails growing near water sources. The ecosystem looks functional, productive and alive, but it's different in character from the Cretaceous forests. Quieter somehow. The largest herbivores are mammals weighing maybe 50 pounds. The predators are proportionally small. The overall biomass, the total weight of all living things in a given area, is perhaps a tenth of what it was before the impact. The world is healing, but it's healing into something new. The age of reptiles is over. The age of mammals is beginning, though it will take millions of years to fully develop. Birds, the only dinosaurs to survive, are carving out their own evolutionary trajectory. One that will eventually produce the incredible diversity of modern avian life. You watch a group of small mammals feeding together in a clearing. They're cautious, constantly alert for danger, but there's also a sense of opportunity in their movements. This is their world now. The mammals inherited the earth not through superiority or better design, but through luck and circumstance, because they happened to have characteristics: small size, burrowing behavior, omnivorous diets, that allowed them to survive when larger, more specialized creatures couldn't. As night falls, you hear sounds that would never have existed in the Cretaceous. Early primates calling from the trees, small predatory mammals stalking through the undergrowth. The world is being rebuilt by creatures that spent the Mesozoic era in the dinosaurs' shadow, and they're building something different, something that will eventually lead to grasslands and coral reefs and rainforests, to whales and elephants and eagles, and, in a humid African forest about 65 million years from now, to a species of primate that will develop the capacity to look back at this moment, to understand what happened, and to mourn creatures they never met and can only know through the fragmentary record of fossilized bones. You're now 1 million years after the impact. The transformation of Earth's ecosystems has progressed remarkably. Standing in what will one day be Wyoming, you're surrounded by a dense subtropical forest. The climate has warmed considerably from the impact winter. In fact, it's warmer than it was even in the late Cretaceous. The carbon dioxide released by the impact and its aftermath has created a greenhouse effect that will persist for millions of years. The trees around you include early relatives of modern oaks, walnuts and palms. They're not identical to their modern descendants, but recognizably related. A canopy stretches overhead, creating layers of habitat. Epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants, drape from branches. The forest has regained its three-dimensional complexity. You hear something moving in the canopy and look up to see a mammal about the size of a house cat leaping between branches. It's an early primate ancestor, though it would look strange to modern eyes. More like a lemur than a monkey, with large eyes adapted for nocturnal activity and a long tail for balance. Its descendants will diversify into the entire primate lineage, but right now it's just one of many small mammals exploiting the resources of the recovering forest. On the ground, larger mammals are beginning to appear. You spot a creature about the size of a sheep, one of the early ungulates, ancestors to the hoofed mammals that will eventually dominate grasslands that don't yet exist. It's browsing on low vegetation, its teeth showing adaptations for processing plant material that are more advanced than those of its immediate ancestors. The forest floor is alive with insects. Ants march in columns along fallen logs. Butterflies and moths visit flowers, continuing the co-evolutionary dance between insects and flowering plants that survived the impact. Beetles of astonishing variety crawl through the leaf litter. The insect diversity has recovered to, or perhaps exceeded, its pre-impact levels. Birds are everywhere, and they're diversifying rapidly. You see early representatives of modern bird groups, something that might be an ancestor to modern parrots, and another that resembles a primitive woodpecker. They're filling niches that flying pterosaurs once occupied, but they're doing it in their own way, with their own unique evolutionary solutions to the challenges of aerial life. The rivers and lakes teem with life. Fish populations have not only recovered but also diversified. Turtles sun themselves on logs. Crocodilians lurk in the deeper pools, unchanged by the passage of 1,000,000 years. The aquatic ecosystems bounce back faster than the terrestrial ones, and they show it in their abundance and variety. You find another fossil, this one a hadrosaur bone, mineralized and weathered, protruding from a riverbank. The river has cut through millions of years of sediment, exposing layers that tell the story of the impact and its aftermath. Below the hadrosaur bone, layers filled with dinosaur fossils. Above it, layers containing mammal fossils. And at the boundary between them, a thin layer of clay enriched with iridium, a rare element more common in asteroids than on Earth's surface. Physical evidence of the impact that changed everything. 5 million years after the impact, you're in what will become Germany. The climate has cooled slightly from the post-impact peak, settling into a warm, wet regime that supports vast rainforests. The forests stretch from horizon to horizon, unbroken except by rivers and lakes. The diversity of life is staggering. You estimate hundreds of species of plants within a square mile, countless insects, and dozens of mammal species. The mammals have grown larger. You observe a creature the size of a modern tapir, a browser that feeds on leaves and shoots. Another mammal, built more like a modern cat, stalks through the undergrowth, an early predator, experimenting with the hunting strategies that will eventually produce everything from weasels to lions. The ecological roles are being filled, but by different actors than in the Cretaceous. Birds have achieved remarkable diversity. Early representatives of most modern bird orders now exist. You spot something that might be an ancestor to modern ducks paddling in a lake. In the trees, early relatives of owls and hawks are developing the predatory skills that will make birds so successful. The songbirds are beginning to appear, their vocalization still simple, but showing the potential for the complex songs that will evolve later. The plant communities have developed sophisticated structure. There are emergent trees that tower over the main canopy, creating a tier system that maximizes light capture. Vines and lianas connect trees, creating aerial highways for climbing mammals and insects. The forest floor supports shade-tolerant plants that can survive on the dim light that filters through the canopy. You notice that certain plant families have come to dominate. The legumes, the palms, and early grasses in open areas. These are the groups that recovered fastest from the impact, and that had characteristics allowing them to colonize disturbed habitats and thrive in changing conditions. The forests of the Paleocene aren't random assemblages, but communities shaped by the selection pressure of the extinction event and the recovery that followed. 10 million years after the impact, you're observing the transition from the Paleocene to the Eocene epoch. The climate is warm, warmer than any time in the past 10 million years. Crocodilians live in what is now the Arctic. Palms grow in Alaska. The Earth has entered a hothouse phase, possibly the warmest climate of the past 100 million years. The mammals have exploded in diversity and size. You see creatures that resemble modern horses, though they're much smaller and have multiple toes instead of hooves. Early whales, still retaining vestigial legs, hunt in shallow coastal seas, showing how some mammal lineages are returning to the water that their distant ancestors left hundreds of millions of years ago. Bats, the only mammals to achieve powered flight, swoop through the evening air, using echolocation to hunt insects. The first grass-dominated ecosystems are beginning to appear in drier regions. Grasses, which existed before the impact but were never dominant, are expanding their range. With them come new types of herbivores, mammals developing teeth that can handle the tough, silica-laden grass blades. The stage is being set for the savanna ecosystems that will characterize much of the later Cenozoic. You stand on a hilltop at sunset, watching the landscape spread before you. The forests, the rivers, the diversity of life. It's all magnificent. Perhaps as magnificent as the Cretaceous ecosystems you observed at the beginning of this journey, but it's different. The dominant players have changed. The evolutionary strategies have shifted. This is Earth renewed, but not Earth restored. The dinosaurs won't come back. Their ecological roles have been filled by other creatures, and those creatures are now established, evolving, adapting, and creating their own evolutionary trajectories. The window during which dinosaurs could re-evolve has closed. The Earth has moved on, but looking at this thriving, complex ecosystem, you realize something important. The planet itself is resilient in a way that individual species and lineages are not. The impact killed the dinosaurs and countless other species, fundamentally restructured ecosystems, and altered the course of evolutionary history. But it didn't kill life itself. It didn't prevent the rebuilding of complex, diverse ecosystems. It changed what existed, but not the existence of life itself. In 56 million years, descendants of the small mammals you see here will have diversified into creatures ranging from blue whales to shrews, from giraffes to bats, and from humans to elephants. The birds will have produced penguins and peacocks, hummingbirds and eagles. The plants will have created everything from giant sequoias to tiny orchids. The impact was a tragedy for the dinosaurs and a catastrophe for the ecosystems they inhabited. But for Earth as a whole, it was a transition, a reshuffling of the deck that opened up possibilities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Standing here, watching the sun set over this renewed world, you can appreciate both the loss and the emergence, both the ending of one age and the beginning of another. You're no longer in deep time. You're standing in a museum in the present day, looking at a fossilized Triceratops skull. The bone is mineralized, turned to stone over 66 million years, but it retains the shape and texture that it had in life. The eye sockets stare at nothing. The beak, which once stripped vegetation from plants that no longer exist, is frozen in permanent stillness. Behind you, a group of children clusters around a full T-Rex skeleton. Their excitement is palpable. They've grown up with dinosaurs in their imaginations, these creatures from deep time made familiar through books and movies and museum visits. But the skeleton before them represents something more than entertainment. It represents one of the greatest detective stories in scientific history. The understanding of what happened to the dinosaurs came slowly, built from countless observations and measurements, from decades of painstaking work by geologists, paleontologists, physicists and chemists. For over a century after the first dinosaur fossils were recognized and described, scientists knew that dinosaurs had gone extinct, but they didn't know why. Some proposed that the dinosaurs had simply grown too large, too specialized, and too slow to adapt to changing conditions. Others suggested disease, or climate change, or competition from mammals. Each theory had problems. The dinosaurs had survived climate changes before. They weren't all large. Many species were small and agile. Disease doesn't typically cause worldwide extinction of multiple unrelated groups. The breakthrough came in 1980, when physicist Luis Alvarez and his son Walter, a geologist, published a paper proposing that an asteroid impact had caused the extinction. Their evidence was a thin layer of clay found at the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleocene periods, the KPG boundary, that contained unusually high concentrations of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. The scientific community was skeptical. Catastrophic events weren't popular in geology at the time, which favoured gradual processes operating over long timescales. But the evidence accumulated. The iridium layer was found at sites around the world. Shocked quartz crystals fractured by immense pressure, appeared at the boundary. Soot from continent-spanning wildfires. Tiny glass spherules formed from vaporized rock. The final piece of evidence came in 1991 with the identification of the impact crater itself, the Chicxulub crater, buried beneath the Yucatan Peninsula, precisely the right age, the right size, and in exactly the kind of coastal location that would maximize the destructive effects of an ocean impact. You walk through the museum, passing displays that illustrate this scientific journey. Here's a map showing iridium concentrations around the world. There's a sample of shocked quartz, its crystal structure deformed by pressures that only asteroid impacts or nuclear explosions can generate. In another case, you see computer simulations of the impact and its immediate aftermath. But understanding that an impact occurred doesn't fully explain why the dinosaurs died while other groups survived. You pause at a display that addresses this question. The key factors scientists now understand were size, diet, and habitat. Large animals require more food. When the impact shut down photosynthesis and collapsed food chains, large herbivores starved first, followed quickly by the large predators that depended on them. Smaller animals with lower caloric needs could survive on the scraps, seeds, insects, and carrion that persisted through the impact winter. Diet mattered too. Specialists, creatures that depended on specific food sources, fared worse than generalists, who could eat whatever was available. The hadrosaurs you watched, with their specialized teeth for processing particular types of vegetation, couldn't switch to a different diet when their preferred plants died. The small mammals you saw surviving, omnivorous and flexible, could and did. Habitat provided protection. Burrowing animals could escape the thermal pulse and find shelter from the cold. Aquatic animals were buffered from temperature extremes. Flying animals could migrate in search of food. The large terrestrial dinosaurs, built for life on land and unable to escape underground or underwater, were maximally exposed to the catastrophe. You reach a display about the survivors, the birds of course, technically dinosaurs themselves, though small enough and adaptable enough to make it through. The mammals, sheltering underground and eating whatever they could find. The crocodilians and turtles, their low metabolisms allowing them to survive months without food. The fish and insects and plants with seed banks or spores that could wait out the darkness. The extinction wasn't random, the display explains, it was selective. The survivors shared characteristics that happened to be advantageous during a short-lived but extreme environmental catastrophe. Those characteristics had nothing to do with being better or more advanced in any general sense. In normal times, being large, specialized, and living exclusively on land were perfectly good strategies. They'd worked for millions of years. But when the asteroid hit, those strategies became liabilities. You move to a section on the aftermath. Scientists now understand that the recovery took much longer than the extinction itself. The impact killed the dinosaurs in decades to centuries, but rebuilding complex ecosystems took millions of years. The fossil record shows a slow progression from simple communities dominated by ferns and other disaster species to more diverse forests, to the complex ecosystems of the Eocene and later epochs. There's a display about impact winter, illustrating how the dust and soot blocked sunlight. Another was about the greenhouse warming that followed once the particulates settled, but the carbon dioxide remained. A third is about ocean acidification from sulfur aerosols. The extinction wasn't a single event, but a cascade of environmental catastrophes, each one weeding out species until only the most resilient or lucky remained. You find yourself in front of a timeline showing extinction events throughout Earth's history. The KPG extinction, the one that killed the dinosaurs, is marked clearly, but it's not the largest. That distinction belongs to the Permian-Triassic extinction 250 million years ago, which killed over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. The dinosaurs themselves rose to dominance in the aftermath of that earlier catastrophe. The timeline illustrates a humbling truth. Extinction is normal. The vast majority of species that ever existed are extinct. The average species lifetime is measured in millions of years, long by human standards, but brief in geological time. What's unusual about the KP extinction isn't that it happened, but that it happened so quickly, and was caused by an external extraterrestrial event rather than by Earth-based processes like volcanism or climate change. You pause at a display about modern extinction rates. Scientists estimate that species are currently going extinct at rates 100 to 1,000 times higher than the background rate, not because of asteroids, but because of human activity. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, overhunting. The causes are different, but the results may be comparable. Some scientists call it the sixth extinction, placing it in the same category as the event that killed the dinosaurs. The comparison makes you uncomfortable, as it should. The dinosaurs couldn't prevent their extinction. They had no agency, no ability to change course or mitigate the impact's effects. They were victims of cosmic bad luck. Humans, in contrast, understand what's happening and have the capacity to change it. The knowledge gained from studying the dinosaurs' extinction isn't just historical curiosity, it's a warning. You finish your museum visit in a hall displaying living reptiles and birds. There's a parrot, its intelligence and social complexity rivaling many mammals, a crocodile, outwardly unchanged from its Cretaceous ancestors, a turtle, carrying a body plan that has worked for over 200 million years, and prominently a display about bird evolution, showing how the small theropods that survived the impact diversified into the 10,000 species of birds alive today. Looking at that parrot, descendant of dinosaurs, inheritor of their genetic legacy, proof that not all the dinosaurs died, you realize that the story of dinosaur extinction is more nuanced than simple death and disappearance. The non-avian dinosaurs are gone, yes. The massive sauropods, the horned ceratopsians, and the tyrannosaurs, all extinct. But the dinosaur lineage persists in birds, still successful, still evolving, still filling ecological niches around the world. The scientific understanding of dinosaur extinction is one of humanity's great intellectual achievements. It required insights from multiple disciplines, observations from around the world, sophisticated analytical techniques, and decades of dedicated work. It revealed both the fragility and the resilience of life, the power of catastrophic events to reshape evolutionary history, and the importance of understanding our planet's past to navigate its future. As you leave the museum, you carry with you not just knowledge about what happened 66 million years ago, but perspective about where we are now, what we're doing to the planet, and what we might need to do differently if we want to avoid becoming the next Triceratops, the next T-Rex, successful for millions of years until we weren't, leaving only fossils for some future intelligence to puzzle over. You're standing in a forest in Papua New Guinea, watching a cassowary pick its way through the undergrowth. The bird stands nearly 6 feet tall, its body covered in black feathers, its head sporting a bony casque that looks almost helmet-like. Its legs are powerful, equipped with claws that could easily disembowel a predator. Looking at it, you can't help but see the dinosaur heritage. This is what survived. Not the giants, not the terrible lizards of popular imagination, but this, a lineage of small theropods that happen to have feathers, happen to be small enough to survive the impact winter, and happen to be adaptable enough to thrive in the aftermath. The cassowary's ancestors walked among T-Rex and Triceratops, and they're still here. The cassowary moves with a distinctive gait, head bobbing with each step. The same basic movement pattern you'd see in any ground bird, from chickens to ostriches. It's a locomotion style inherited from bipedal theropod dinosaurs, modified over millions of years but fundamentally unchanged. The bird's eyes, positioned on the sides of its head, provide nearly 360-degree vision, a trait shared with its dinosaurian ancestors, useful for detecting both predators and prey. You notice the bird's feet, 3 toes pointing forward, 1 pointing back, arranged in the same pattern as theropod trackways found in rock formations around the world. Paleontologists recognized this connection long before the broader scientific community accepted that birds are dinosaurs. The anatomical evidence was always there, in the bones and the footprints, waiting to be properly interpreted. Moving to a different location, you're now in the Amazon rainforest, observing a hoatzin, a bizarre bird that retains juvenile claws on its wings, which the chicks use to climb through vegetation. It's one of the most primitive birds, showing characteristics that hint at its dinosaurian origins more clearly than most modern species. Watching it clamber awkwardly through the branches, you can imagine the transitional forms, the creatures that were neither fully dinosaurs nor fully birds but something in between. The fossil record has provided spectacular examples of these transitional forms. Archaeopteryx, discovered in 1861, showed a mixture of reptilian and avian features so perfect that it could have been manufactured to prove evolutionary theory. More recently, discoveries in China have revealed dozens of feathered dinosaurs, showing that feathers evolved long before flight, probably for insulation or display, and were later co-opted for aerial locomotion. You're holding a hummingbird in your hand, not literally, but watching one hover at a flower, its wings beating too fast to see clearly. This tiny creature, weighing less than a nickel, is as much a dinosaur as T-Rex. Its high metabolism, its hollow bones, and its 4-chambered heart, all inherited from theropod ancestors. The hummingbird represents an extreme elaboration of the basic dinosaur body plan, optimized for a lifestyle that requires hovering in mid-air and feeding on nectar. The evolutionary path from T-Rex to hummingbird seems almost absurdly improbable, but it's documented in the fossil record and confirmed by genetic analysis. Birds and crocodilians are each other's closest living relatives, a fact that would surprise most people, but makes perfect sense when you understand that they're both archosaurs, members of the group that dominated the Mesozoic. Crocodilians represent one line of archosaur evolution. Dinosaurs, including birds, represent another. You're now in Antarctica, watching penguins dive into the frigid ocean. These birds have evolved to a lifestyle so different from their flying ancestors that they seem almost alien. Their wings have become flippers, optimized for swimming rather than flight. They can dive hundreds of feet deep and stay underwater for 20 minutes. Yet they're still dinosaurs, still carrying the genetic legacy of creatures that walked on land 66 million years ago. The adaptability that allowed birds to survive the KPG extinction has served them well in the subsequent millions of years. They've diversified to fill ecological niches on every continent and in every habitat type. Seabirds like albatrosses spend years at sea, almost never touching land. Forest birds like woodpeckers have evolved specialized skulls that allow them to hammer on trees without getting concussions. Owls hunt silently in the darkness, their feathers modified to eliminate flight noise. Walking through a city park, you're surrounded by pigeons, descendants of rock doves that humans domesticated thousands of years ago. These birds have adapted to urban environments so successfully that they thrive in cities worldwide. They nest on buildings instead of cliffs, eat food scraps instead of seeds, and navigate around traffic with ease. Their success in human-dominated landscapes is testament to the evolutionary flexibility inherited from their dinosaurian ancestors. You notice a crow investigating a puzzle box using tools to extract food. Corvids, the family that includes crows, ravens, and jays, display intelligence that rivals great apes. They can recognize individual human faces, hold grudges, plan for the future, and even understand concepts like zero. This cognitive sophistication evolved independently from mammalian intelligence, showing that the dinosaur lineage was capable of producing complex brains and behaviors. In a laboratory, you're watching a chicken embryo develop. In the early stages, it has teeth and a long bony tail, characteristics its ancestors lost millions of years ago, but which are still encoded in its DNA. Scientists can reactivate these dormant genes, creating chickens with dinosaur-like features. The experiment demonstrates that evolution doesn't create new features from nothing, but modifies and recombines existing genetic material, and that modern birds retain in their genomes the instructions for building features their ancestors possessed. The genetic studies have revealed fascinating details about bird evolution. The high metabolic rate, the efficient respiratory system with air sacs extending into hollow bones, and the sophisticated colour vision. All of these appear to have been present in at least some theropod dinosaurs before the KPG extinction. Birds didn't invent these features, they inherited them and then refined them over millions of years. You're in Madagascar, observing elephant birds, or rather, looking at their bones in a museum since they went extinct only a few hundred years ago, hunted to extinction by humans. These flightless giants stood 10 feet tall and weighed half a ton, the largest birds ever to exist. Their extinction illustrates that dinosaurs, avian dinosaurs, are still vulnerable to environmental catastrophes, especially those caused by a species capable of rapidly transforming ecosystems. In New Zealand, the story is similar. Moas, giant flightless birds that evolved in the absence of mammalian predators, thrived for millions of years until humans arrived. Within a few centuries, all moa species were extinct. The parallel to the non-avian dinosaurs is sobering. Evolutionary success measured in millions of years offers no protection against rapid environmental change. But most bird species are still thriving, at least for now. You're in a tropical rainforest at dawn, experiencing what biologists call the dawn chorus. Dozens of bird species calling simultaneously, creating a wall of sound that's almost overwhelming. Each species has its own song, its own acoustic niche. Songbirds evolved their sophisticated vocalizations about 50 million years ago, and they've been refining them ever since. The ability to produce complex sounds required specialized anatomy. A syrinx, the avian vocal organ, which allows some species to produce two different notes simultaneously. Lyrebirds can mimic almost any sound they hear, including chainsaws and car alarms. This vocal flexibility may have evolved from the same neurological substrate that allows for complex communication in many dinosaurs. We know from fossilized skulls that some hadrosaurs had elaborate nasal passages likely used for vocalization. You finish your journey in a backyard watching common birds at a feeder, sparrows, finches and cardinals. These unremarkable birds, so familiar they're almost invisible, represent one of evolution's greatest success stories. They're dinosaurs, refined by 66 million years of natural selection, adapted to thrive in a world utterly different from the one their ancestors knew. They survived the asteroid, the impact winter, and the millions of years of ecosystem reorganization that followed. Looking at them, you realize that the question isn't just what killed the dinosaurs, but what allowed some dinosaurs to survive. The answer lies in the characteristics birds inherited and refined: small size, high metabolism, adaptable diet, and the ability to move quickly across changing landscapes. These traits served their ancestors well in the Cretaceous, but they became absolutely crucial when the world ended and had to be remade. The dinosaurs didn't disappear. They transformed. They adapted. They persisted through the worst catastrophe to hit Earth in hundreds of millions of years, and they're still here, still evolving, still successful. Every bird you see is a living dinosaur, carrying genetic information that traces back through an unbroken chain to the Triassic period, more than 200 million years ago. That's not extinction. That's survival. You're standing in the Badlands of Montana as evening settles across the landscape. The eroded hills glow pink and orange in the fading light, layers of sedimentary rock exposed like pages in a book. Each layer represents a slice of time, and somewhere in these rocks lies the thin dark line that marks the KPG boundary, the moment everything changed. A paleontologist works carefully at an excavation site, brushes and small tools revealing bone fragments from the late Cretaceous. Each fossil tells a story, but it's a story that ends abruptly. Above the boundary layer, no more triceratops, no more hadrosaurs, no more tyrannosaurs. Just the quiet testimony of absence. The legacy of the dinosaurs isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle, woven into the fabric of the modern world in ways that aren't immediately obvious. The birds in the trees are the most direct legacy, but there's more. The flowering plants that the dinosaurs helped spread through their feeding and migration now dominate terrestrial ecosystems. The small mammals that survived in the dinosaurs' shadow have inherited the earth and diversified into forms the dinosaurs could never have imagined. You think about the lessons embedded in this story. The first is humility. The dinosaurs were successful beyond measure. They dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years. Humans, in our current form, have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. Our civilizations are younger still, measured in mere thousands of years. By any objective measure, the dinosaurs were more successful than we've been so far. Yet success over millions of years didn't protect them when circumstances changed catastrophically. The second lesson is about the nature of extinction. It's not always dramatic. Yes, the asteroid impact was violent and sudden, But what killed most dinosaurs wasn't the impact itself. It was the slow starvation, the gradual cold, and the accumulating stresses of an ecosystem that had stopped functioning. Most species die not with a bang but with a whimper, populations dwindling over generations until the last individual dies somewhere, unnoticed and unremembered except as a gap in the fossil record. The third lesson is about resilience and adaptation. The dinosaurs that survived, the birds, weren't necessarily superior to those that died. They were lucky in their characteristics, fortunate that the traits they happened to possess aligned with what was needed to survive the catastrophe. Evolution doesn't produce better creatures in any absolute sense. It produces creatures well suited to their current environment. When that environment changes radically, the well-adapted can become the extinct. You're walking now through a modern forest. Oak trees, maple trees, songbirds calling, and a deer in the distance. This ecosystem has no direct connection to the Cretaceous forest you visited at the journey's beginning, and yet it's built on the same fundamental principles. Sunlight converted to chemical energy through photosynthesis, herbivores eating plants, carnivores eating herbivores, and decomposers recycling nutrients. The players have changed, but the play continues. Somewhere in this forest, a fossil lies buried. Perhaps a tooth from a Cretaceous mammal, perhaps a fragment of petrified wood from a tree that grew in the dinosaur's shadow. The rock will erode eventually, exposing the fossil to weather and chance. Maybe someone will find it, recognize it for what it is, and add it to the accumulated knowledge of deep time. Or maybe it will crumble to dust, its story untold. The dinosaurs left behind more than fossils. They left behind ecological space that other creatures filled. They left behind evolutionary experiments, feathers, hollow bones, efficient respiratory systems that birds refined and carried forward. They left behind lessons about the fragility of dominance and the arbitrary nature of survival. Standing here, you realize that humans are writing our own chapter in Earth's history. We're altering climate, driving species extinct, and transforming landscapes on a global scale. We're conducting an experiment whose outcome is uncertain. The dinosaurs didn't choose their fate. They were victims of a cosmic accident. We're different. We see what we're doing. We understand the consequences. We have the knowledge and potentially the ability to choose a different path. The question is whether we will. The night has fully fallen now. Above you, stars appear. Different stars than the dinosaurs saw. Constellations that have shifted over 66 million years as Earth orbits the Sun and the solar system moves through the galaxy. But they're fundamentally the same stars, burning the same nuclear fires, following the same physical laws. You think about time, about the vast stretches of it that separate you from the Triceratops you watched browsing cycads, from the Edmontosaurus herds, and from the Quetzalcoatlus gliding on warm Cretaceous air. 66 million years, a number so large it defeats comprehension. Yet in Earth's 4.5 billion year history, it's just a brief moment, less than 1.5% of the planet's total age. The dinosaurs rose, dominated, and fell within a portion of that history. They didn't fail. Failure implies they were trying to achieve something and didn't succeed. They simply existed, evolved, adapted, and eventually encountered circumstances they couldn't adapt to quickly enough. Their ending was neither tragic nor triumphant. It was simply what happened. And now, in this quiet evening, their legacy surrounds you. In the birds roosting in the trees, in the fossil fuels we burn, created from organisms that lived in the dinosaurs' world, in the limestone buildings of cities made from the shells of marine creatures that lived and died while dinosaurs walked the earth, in the scientific knowledge accumulated from decades of studying their remains, in the wonder they inspire in children and adults alike, bridging millions of years to create connections between modern minds and ancient lives. The gentle disappearance of the dinosaurs, gradual at first, then catastrophically accelerated, then slowly fading from memory except for the clues they left behind, speaks to the impermanence of all things. Species arise and vanish, continents drift, mountains erode, even the stars eventually burn out. Nothing lasts forever, no matter how successful, how well adapted, or how dominant. But while things last, they matter. The dinosaurs mattered to the ecosystems they inhabited, to the evolution of countless other species, and to the shape of the world they left behind. They matter now to the scientists who study them, to the people who marvel at their reconstructed skeletons, and to the writers and artists and filmmakers who bring them back to life in imagination. You're heading back now, leaving the Badlands behind. The fossils remain, locked in stone, waiting. Some will be found and studied, others will erode away, their stories permanently lost. And in the fullness of time, even the fossils that are found and carefully preserved in museums will eventually return to dust, as everything does. But for now, they endure. The bones remember, even if the creatures are gone. They speak of a world fundamentally different from ours, yet governed by the same principles. They remind us that Earth's history is long, that our tenure here is brief, and that the planet existed for billions of years before us, and will likely exist for billions more after us. The dinosaurs slowly disappeared, but they left behind more than absence. They left behind a record of what's possible, of how life can diversify and adapt and fill every available niche. They left behind warnings about what can happen when conditions change faster than evolution can respond. And they left behind inspiration, the sheer wonder of creatures so different from anything alive today, yet so magnificently suited to their time. As you settle in for sleep, the day's journey through deep time fading into dream, you carry with you an understanding. The dinosaur's story isn't separate from our own. We're all part of the same grand narrative, the story of life on Earth, unfolding across billions of years. The dinosaurs had their chapter. We're writing ours now. How it ends is still up to us. Sleep well. The stars that watched over the dinosaurs are watching still, patient and unchanging, as Earth continues its ancient rotation through the vast darkness of space. Welcome to a time before memory, before witness, before any living thing existed to observe the world. You are settling into the story of Earth's early years, when the planet was simply becoming itself through processes so gradual they would be invisible to any single observer. Here, change happens across millions of years, and there is no urgency, only the steady work of rock and water and air finding their rhythms together. You wake on a planet that has been turning for hundreds of millions of years already, though nothing has ever woken here before. The sun rises over an ocean that covers most of the surface, and the light touches water that has never reflected a living eye. The day begins as it always has, with warmth spreading across the curve of the world. The early Earth rotates faster than it will in later ages. A full day passes in perhaps 18 hours, and the cycle of light and darkness moves quickly across the empty seas. You watch the sun climb, and you notice how the light changes the temperature of the rock beneath shallow water. The stone warms through the morning, holds that warmth through the brief afternoon, then releases it slowly as darkness returns. This happens every day. The pattern never breaks. Light arrives, Warmth follows, darkness comes, and coolness settles in. No drama marks these transitions. The sun simply moves through its arc while the planet turns beneath it, and the temperature shifts in response, degree by degree, predictable and steady. Rain falls somewhere on Earth nearly all the time during these early ages. Clouds form over the warm ocean, drift with winds that follow their own consistent patterns, and release water that returns to the sea. You stand on a rocky shore and watch rain approach across the waves, a grey curtain moving steadily toward you, bringing coolness and the sound of water striking water. The rainfall here is not violent. It arrives, continues for hours or days, then passes. The clouds move on, the sky clears, and the sun returns to begin warming the surface again. This cycle repeats without fail, creating a rhythm you could set your breathing to if you needed to breathe. Tides rise and fall with the moon's pull, which is stronger now than it will be later because the moon orbits closer to Earth. Twice each day, water advances up the rocky slopes at the ocean's edge, then withdraws. You watch the waterline climb over familiar stones, pause at its height, then retreat to reveal the same stones again, darkened and dripping. The tidal rhythm connects to the moon's position overhead, and the moon's position connects to the time of day, and the time of day connects back to the sun's light. Everything moves in relation to everything else, creating patterns within patterns, all of them regular, all of them repeating at intervals you could learn to anticipate. At night the stars wheel overhead in their own slow circles, unchanging in their positions relative to one another. The same constellations that marked the sky 1,000,000 years ago mark it tonight. They will mark it 1,000,000 years from now. You lie on a warm rock and watch them turn, knowing they will return to these exact positions tomorrow night and the night after that. The volcanic vents scattered across the ocean floor pulse with heat on their own schedules, releasing warmth and minerals into the water in steady streams. Some vent continuously. Others follow cycles of activity and rest that span decades or centuries. But each vent maintains its particular rhythm, reliable in its pattern, even as the pattern differs from neighbour to neighbour. You notice how the cooling of lava follows its own predictable path. When molten rock meets seawater, it hardens from the outside inward, creating pillow shapes that stack and tumble according to the slope they flow down. The process happens the same way each time. The outcome varies in detail, but never in principle. Temperature differentials drive winds that circle the planet in bands, and these winds push surface water into currents that also circle in their own patterns. Warm water flows toward the poles, cools, and returns toward the equator. The circulation continues day and night, year after year, moving heat around the planet in a system that balances itself through its own motion. Lightning flashes somewhere over the ocean every few seconds during these ages, as storms build and release electricity through the atmosphere. Each bolt follows the path of least resistance between cloud and water, and though no two paths are identical, the principle remains constant. Charge builds, resistance breaks down, energy flows, and balance returns. You watch the sun set over the western horizon, and you know it will rise again in the east. You watch the tide retreat, and you know it will return. You watch clouds gather, and you know they will release their water and clear again. The early Earth operates through cycles that nest inside one another, each one completing itself before beginning again, none of them requiring intervention or adjustment from any outside force. The day ends as it began, with the planet turning toward darkness at the same rate it turned toward light. Nothing has changed in any way that you could measure from one day to the next. Everything has happened exactly as it should, in the order it should, at the pace it should. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, for millions of years to come. You stand on rock that was once liquid and has only recently become solid. The Earth's crust is still forming its permanent features during these ages, but the process happens slowly, with each change building on the last in an orderly progression. The surface is taking shape, but it takes its time doing so. Water condenses from the atmosphere and collects in low places, and as it collects, it begins to define what is ocean and what is land. The distinction emerges gradually over millions of years. At first, water and rock share space in uncertain boundaries, with shallow seas covering platforms that are almost land and almost not. Then, as more water falls and more time passes, the deepest basins fill completely, and the highest platforms rise clear of the water, and the difference between sea and continent becomes real. The rock itself is cooling from the inside out, releasing heat that built up during the planet's formation. This cooling continued for hundreds of millions of years, and it continues still, though more slowly now. You can feel the warmth rising through the stone beneath your feet, steady and gentle, like standing on a surface that remembers being hot and is slowly forgetting. Continents form where lighter rock floats on denser material below, and these floating platforms drift with currents in the layer beneath them. The movement is extraordinarily slow, measured in fingernail widths per year, but it is continuous. A continent drifts northward or eastward, or into collision with another continent, and the collision raises mountains, and the mountains rise at the same patient pace the continents drift. Erosion begins as soon as land rises above water. Rain falls on high ground and runs downward, carrying tiny particles of dissolved rock with it. The particles wash into streams, the streams carry them to rivers, and the rivers deliver them to the ocean. This process never stops, and over time it wears down mountains and fills in valleys, smoothing the landscape toward a gentler average. Minerals crystallize out of cooling rock in predictable sequences. First, the minerals that require the highest temperatures form and settle. Then, as cooling continues, minerals that form at lower temperatures crystallize and join them. The result is stone made of different components arranged in layers and pockets, each mineral in its proper place according to the temperature at which it solidified. The atmosphere is denser now than it will be later, thick with water vapour and carbon dioxide released from volcanic activity. This density holds heat close to the surface, keeping temperatures warm and stable even during the long nights. The air feels heavy when you breathe it, substantial, like something you could almost swim through. Chemical reactions happen constantly wherever water meets rock. Certain minerals dissolve more easily than others, and as water flows over and through stone, it preferentially removes these soluble minerals, leaving behind what does not dissolve. This creates gradual changes in the composition of both the water and the rock, with each becoming more defined in its character over time. Sediment accumulates on the ocean floor in layers that record the passage of time. Fine particles settle continuously, drifting down through the water column and coming to rest on top of what settled before them. Each layer is thin, sometimes representing only a few years of accumulation, but the layers stack into sequences that grow thick enough to compress their own lower portions into new stone. Island chains form where volcanic vents break through the ocean floor repeatedly, as tectonic plates move over them. One volcano builds until it rises above the waterline, then the plate carries it away from the heat source, and it goes dormant. Behind it, a new volcano begins building from the same deep source. The result is a line of islands, each one slightly older than the one behind it, all of them recording the plate's steady motion. The ocean's salinity increases gradually as rivers deliver dissolved minerals to the sea. The water evaporates and falls as rain again, but the minerals stay behind, concentrating slowly over millions of years. The ocean is becoming saltier, but the change happens so slowly that at any given moment the ocean tastes the same as it did 1,000 years before. Glaciers will form later in colder ages, but during these early times the poles are warm and ice-free. Water circulates from equator to pole without freezing, and the temperature difference between tropical and polar regions is smaller than it will become. The planet maintains warmth more evenly across its surface, creating less variation in climate from one latitude to another. Basalt and granite establish themselves as the primary rock types, with basalt forming the ocean floor and granite forming the continents. This division happens because basalt is denser and granite is lighter, and the denser material sinks while the lighter material rises, the arrangement is stable and self-maintaining, requiring no outside adjustment to preserve it. The landscape develops patterns of drainage, with water following the lowest available path downward until it reaches the sea. These drainage patterns organise themselves according to the slope and composition of the land, creating branching networks that look similar whether you view them at the scale of a small watershed or an entire continent. Minerals weather out of rock, dissolve in water, react with other dissolved substances, and precipitate out again as new minerals. The ocean floor is paved with these precipitates in places, forming deposits that will eventually become limestone and other sedimentary rocks. The process is chemical rather than biological, driven by concentration gradients and temperature changes rather than living activity. The crust thickens as lighter materials continue to separate from denser ones, and as the crust thickens, it becomes more stable. What was once a surface that shifted and reorganized frequently becomes a surface that shifts and reorganizes slowly. The change is not toward stillness, but toward a slower, more gradual kind of movement that allows features to persist for longer spans of time. You watch a river carry sediment to the sea, and you know that this river has been carrying sediment for millions of years, grain by grain, building a delta at its mouth that grows outward into the ocean. You watch rain dissolve minerals from a cliff face, and you know that this cliff has been dissolving for millions of years, retreating inland at a pace too slow for any single lifetime to measure. The surface is being built and maintained simultaneously, with construction and erosion balancing each other in a slow equilibrium. You notice how water connects everything to everything else. Rain that falls on high ground flows downward, carrying minerals that will nourish later life. Ocean water evaporates and forms clouds that will become that rain. The cycle links atmosphere to ocean to land and back again, moving material and energy through each component in turn. The atmosphere and ocean exchange heat continuously. When air moves over warm water, it absorbs warmth and carries it to cooler regions. When air cools, it releases that warmth to the water below or the land beneath. This exchange evens out temperature differences, preventing any part of the planet from becoming too hot or too cold relative to the rest. Carbon moves between air, water and rock in its own slow circulation. Carbon dioxide dissolves in ocean water, reacts with minerals, and eventually becomes part of sedimentary rock. Volcanic activity releases carbon from rock back into the atmosphere. The cycle takes millions of years to complete one full circuit, but it operates continuously, keeping carbon in motion rather than allowing it to concentrate in any single reservoir. Tectonic plates interact at their boundaries, and these interactions take different forms depending on what kind of plate meets what kind of plate. Where two plates move apart, new ocean floor forms between them. Where they move together, one plate slides beneath the other, or both crumple and rise into mountains. Each type of boundary creates its own characteristic landforms, and the boundaries collectively organize the surface into distinct sections. Energy from the sun drives winds, which drive ocean currents, which distribute heat, which affects where clouds form, which determines where rain falls, which shapes the land through erosion, which changes the patterns of drainage, which alters where sediment accumulates. Each process connects to the next in a chain that loops back on itself, so that the end state of one cycle becomes the starting condition for another. The ocean's temperature affects how much carbon dioxide it can hold in solution. Warmer water holds less. Colder water holds more. As currents circulate water between warm and cold regions, they also circulate carbon between surface and atmosphere, participating in the larger carbon cycle through this temperature-dependent exchange. Weathering of rock requires both water and time, and the rate of weathering depends on temperature and rainfall. In warm, wet regions, rock breaks down more quickly, releasing minerals into solution. In cool, dry regions, rock weathers more slowly, remaining intact for longer periods. This variation creates different kinds of soil in different climates, each one suited to the conditions that produced it. The day-night cycle creates temperature variations that expand and contract rock, and this expansion and contraction contributes to mechanical weathering. The effect is small on any single day, but repeated millions of times over millions of years, it becomes significant. Rock fractures along lines of weakness, creating smaller pieces that weather chemically more quickly than solid stone. Volcanic gases feed the atmosphere, and the atmosphere feeds the ocean through rain, and the ocean feeds back to volcanism by carrying water down into subduction zones, where it lowers the melting point of rock and enables magma to form. The system is circular, with each component supplying what another component needs to continue its own processes. Seasonal variations develop as the Earth's tilted axis causes different parts of the planet to receive more or less direct sunlight at different times of year. The variation is subtle during these early ages when the climate is generally warm, but it exists. You can observe how rainfall patterns shift with the seasons, following the sun's apparent movement north and south. The formation of new ocean floor at spreading ridges pushes older floor outward toward the edges of ocean basins, and at those edges the old floor sinks back into the mantle. The ocean floor is therefore young near the ridges and old near the margins, and it exists in constant circulation, renewing itself completely every few 100 million years. Minerals transported by rivers accumulate in deltas and coastal areas, and these accumulations become resources for later processes. Iron settles in certain conditions, silica in others, and calcium carbonate in still others. Each mineral finds its preferred environment and concentrates there, creating variety across the landscape. The atmosphere shields the surface from harmful radiation while allowing visible light through, and this selective filtering creates conditions where chemistry can proceed at moderate temperatures without being disrupted by high-energy particles. The shield is not perfect, but it is sufficient, maintaining a protected space between the vacuum of space and the solid surface of the planet. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor create zones of chemical activity, where hot, mineral-rich water meets cold seawater. Minerals precipitate out of solution, forming chimney-like structures around the vents. The chemicals released by these vents enrich the surrounding water, distributing elements that will later prove useful to living systems. The gravitational pull of the moon and sun together creates tidal forces that flex the Earth's crust slightly, and this flexing generates a small amount of heat through friction. The heat is minor compared to the heat from radioactive decay in the planet's interior, but it contributes to the total energy budget, adding one more source to the mix of energy that keeps the planet active. Ocean currents transport not just heat, but also dissolved minerals distributing resources around the planet. Water that rises from the deep ocean in upwelling zones brings nutrients to the surface. Water that sinks in downwelling zones carries oxygen to depth. The circulation ensures that the ocean does not stratify into permanently separate layers, but remains mixed and accessible. The land surface channels water into rivers, and the rivers carve valleys that channel water more efficiently, and the improved drainage allows the land to dry out between rains, and the drying and wetting cycles weather the rock more effectively. Each change enables the next change, so that the landscape gradually becomes more organised, more defined in its features, and more distinctly itself. You stand at the edge of the ocean and watch waves arrive from far out at sea, their energy delivered by winds that gathered force over hundreds of miles of open water. The waves break on the shore, and their energy goes into moving sand and grinding rock, contributing to the ongoing reshaping of the coastline. Nothing is wasted. Every bit of energy does work, and the work accumulates into lasting changes. You notice that the Earth settles into long periods where little seems to change. After the initial cooling and the formation of the first permanent oceans, the planet enters stretches of time measured in tens of millions of years where conditions remain remarkably steady. The temperature holds within a narrow range. The ocean stays at roughly the same level. The composition of the atmosphere shifts, but slowly without sudden transitions. These periods are not stillness. Erosion continues, tectonic plates continue drifting, and volcanic activity continues adding material to the surface. But the rate of change is slow enough that the planet at the end of a 10 million year span looks much like it did at the beginning. The changes are real but gradual, creating a sense of deep stability even while nothing actually stops moving. The ocean reaches an equilibrium where the rate of evaporation matches the rate of precipitation, and where the rate of sediment washing into the sea matches the rate of sediment being subducted and returned to the mantle. Water enters and leaves the ocean constantly, but the total volume remains stable, with the same amount present year after year, millennium after millennium. Temperature fluctuations even out over time. Early in Earth's history, volcanic activity was more intense and less predictable, creating periods of unusual warmth followed by relative cooling. As the planet ages, volcanic activity becomes more regular and more distributed across the surface, and less prone to clustering in ways that would create climate extremes. The result is a more stable climate, one that varies from season to season but not drastically from age to age. You observe how the day-night cycle provides a built-in rhythm of activity and rest. During the day, solar energy warms the surface, evaporates water, drives winds, and powers photochemical reactions in the atmosphere. During the night, the surface cools, winds calm, and chemical processes that require darkness or cooler temperatures take their turn. The alternation creates a natural pacing, a rhythm that prevents any one process from running continuously without pause. Tides provide another rhythm, independent of daylight but equally regular. The rise and fall of water at the ocean's edge creates alternating periods of exposure and submersion for the intertidal zone. Rock that is underwater during high tide is exposed to air during low tide, and this alternation creates conditions that will later prove useful for organisms transitioning between aquatic and terrestrial life. The seasons, even though mild during these warm ages, create their own rhythms of variation and return. Rainfall patterns shift with the sun's position, creating wetter and drier periods that alternate in predictable ways. These variations are gentle, never extreme, but they add texture to the passing of time, making one part of the year distinguishable from another. Volcanic cycles follow longer rhythms, with periods of increased activity separated by periods of relative quiet. These cycles are irregular, not tied to any particular schedule, but they average out over time into a background level of activity that feeds the atmosphere and ocean without overwhelming them. The planet has time to process what each eruption releases before the next eruption arrives. Continental drift proceeds at its unhurried pace, moving land masses across the surface over millions of years. A continent that begins near the equator will eventually drift toward a pole, and then perhaps back toward the equator again. The movement is slow enough that climate zones shift gradually, allowing the surface to adjust to new conditions without sudden disruptions. The carbon cycle maintains a rough balance between carbon stored in rocks, carbon dissolved in the ocean, and carbon present in the atmosphere. The balance is not perfect. Carbon concentrations shift over time, sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing, but the shifts happen slowly, and the system has mechanisms that prevent carbon from accumulating entirely in one reservoir at the expense of the others. Between periods of mountain building, the land has time to erode back towards sea level. Mountains rise when continents collide, creating highlands that stand well above the surrounding plains. Then, over the following tens of millions of years, erosion wears those mountains down, grain by grain, returning the material to the ocean. The land surface rises and falls in long cycles, never remaining at one elevation permanently. You notice how the ocean floor records these rhythms in its sediments. Layers of fine clay alternate with layers of coarser material, recording changes in the strength of ocean currents. The layers stack in regular patterns, each one representing a particular set of conditions that repeated at intervals too long for any single observer to witness, but clear enough in the geological record to show that they happened regularly. The atmosphere's composition stabilizes as the initial outgassing from volcanism slows, and the various chemical reactions reach a kind of working balance. The air still contains more carbon dioxide than it will in later ages, but the amount is not increasing as rapidly as it did earlier. The atmosphere is finding its functional composition, the mix of gases that will support the chemistry of the surface without requiring constant adjustment. Hydrothermal circulation at mid-ocean ridges provides a rhythm of water heating and cooling. Cold seawater seeps into cracks in the ocean floor, circulates through hot rock, and emerges heated and enriched with minerals. The cycle takes years to decades to complete, depending on the path the water follows, but it operates continuously at spreading centres around the planet, providing a slow, steady flow of chemical energy to the ocean. The planet's rotation is slowing due to tidal friction, and this slowing adds a few seconds to the length of the day every few million years. The change is imperceptible on human timescales, but real over geological time. The Earth is settling into a rhythm that will eventually stabilise at a 24-hour day, though it is not there yet. You stand on a coast and watch the same waves arrive day after day, year after year. The waves are driven by wind, the wind is driven by temperature differences, and the temperature differences are driven by the sun's heat. The chain of causation is long but unbroken, and it operates continuously, creating patterns that repeat without requiring intervention. The ocean rises and falls with the tides, the surface temperature varies with the time of day, and the planet turns beneath the sun, all of it happening in rhythms that nest inside one another like the gears of a vast patient clock. You notice that the planet is preparing conditions that will later support living things, though nothing is alive yet during most of these early ages. The preparation happens without intention, simply as a consequence of chemistry and physics, playing out according to their rules. Water accumulates in places where it will be accessible. Minerals dissolve and precipitate in forms that will be useful. Energy flows through the system in ways that will later be captured and used. Water is everywhere. It fills the ocean basins, saturates the atmosphere as vapour, falls as rain, flows through rivers and seeps into rock. This abundance means that when chemistry begins producing the first simple organic molecules, those molecules will have a medium to interact in. Water is the universal solvent, capable of dissolving a wide range of substances and bringing them into contact with one another. The ocean contains iron, sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, and other elements that will become essential to living chemistry. These elements wash into the sea from weathering rock, or emerge from hydrothermal vents, or arrive in volcanic gases that dissolve in seawater. They are present in small concentrations but in reliable supply, distributed throughout the ocean rather than concentrated in a few inaccessible locations. Energy is available in multiple forms. Sunlight reaches the surface, providing a constant input of energy that drives photochemical reactions. Lightning adds brief bursts of high energy, capable of forging chemical bonds that would not form otherwise. Hydrothermal vents provide thermal energy and chemical gradients. Radioactivity in rocks provides a slow, steady background of energy. The planet offers many sources, ensuring that chemistry has options to draw from. The atmosphere contains the building blocks of organic chemistry. Carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, nitrogen and hydrogen in water vapour. These simple molecules can combine into more complex ones given the right conditions and enough time. The atmosphere is like a cupboard stocked with ingredients, waiting for the right recipe to emerge from trial and error. Tidal pools form in rocky coastal areas, and these pools provide natural laboratories where concentrated solutions can undergo chemical reactions. When the tide is high, seawater fills the pools, bringing fresh minerals. When the tide is low, evaporation concentrates whatever is dissolved in the water, increasing the chances that molecules will encounter one another and react. The pools fill and empty on a regular schedule, creating a rhythm that repeats the experiment over and over. Clay minerals form from the weathering of volcanic rock, and these clays have useful properties. They provide surfaces where molecules can absorb and be held in close proximity, increasing the likelihood of reaction. They can also catalyze certain reactions, speeding them up without being consumed themselves. The ocean floor and coastal areas are rich in clays, offering countless microscopic reaction chambers. The temperature of the early Earth is warm but not too hot, cool but not too cold. Water remains liquid over most of the surface, maintaining the range where chemistry proceeds at useful rates. If the planet were hotter, water would evaporate and chemistry would slow. If it were colder, water would freeze and chemistry would stop. The temperature is in the range where things can happen. Cycles of wet and dry provide opportunities for molecules to form in solution, and then concentrate as water evaporates. Some chemical reactions proceed better in concentrated solutions, and others proceed better in dilute ones. The alternation between wet and dry periods allows both types of reactions to occur in sequence, creating pathways to complexity that would not be available if conditions were always the same. Volcanic activity continues to add fresh material to the surface, replacing what erosion removes and ensuring that the supply of minerals does not run out. Each volcanic eruption brings rock from the mantle to the surface, rock that has never been weathered before, rich in elements that dissolve readily once exposed to water and air. The planet is not running down but renewing itself, maintaining the conditions that support chemical activity. The day-night cycle creates temperature variations that can drive chemical processes. Some reactions proceed better in warmth, others in coolness. The alternation between day and night provides a natural cycling between conditions, allowing different types of chemistry to take turns using the same space. Rivers deliver nutrients from the continents to the ocean, concentrating minerals in deltas and estuaries. These transition zones between fresh water and salt water provide gradients in salinity, temperature, and mineral content, creating diverse chemical environments in close proximity. What does not react in one environment may react in the next. The ocean circulation ensures that no part of the water becomes permanently isolated. Surface water eventually sinks, deep water eventually rises, and the mixing distributes whatever forms in one location to other locations. This circulation prevents resources from becoming trapped and unavailable, keeping them in motion and accessible. Phosphorus, crucial for later biochemistry, weathers out of rock and accumulates in sediments. It is not abundant, but it is present, and the processes that concentrate it in particular locations are slow and reliable. The planet is gathering phosphorus in places where it will be available when needed. The magnetic field generated by the Earth's molten core shields the surface from solar wind, preventing the atmosphere from being stripped away over time. This protection ensures that the atmosphere remains thick enough to support chemistry at the surface, maintaining pressure and retaining water vapor. The shield is invisible but essential, preserving the conditions that make everything else possible. You stand at the edge of a warm, shallow sea and observe how gentle waves stir the sediment, keeping particles suspended and in contact with dissolved nutrients. The water is rich with potential, holding everything that will be needed but not yet assembled into the forms that will use it. The planet is ready, stocked with materials and energy, maintaining stable conditions and simply waiting for chemistry to find its way to the patterns that will eventually become life. You notice that the Earth is entering longer periods of predictable calm. The initial intensity of planetary formation has passed. The atmosphere is thick and stable. The ocean has reached its long-term volume. The continents have taken shape and are drifting slowly, no longer reorganizing dramatically from one age to the next. The planet is settling into a mature rhythm, like an evening after a day of activity. The sun's light is gentler now than it was billions of years ago, slightly dimmer as the star ages, but still sufficient to warm the surface and drive the water cycle. The light arrives each morning at the same angle for any given location and season, creating patterns of warmth and shadow that repeat with comforting regularity. Temperatures across the planet fall within a moderate range. The equator is warm, the poles are cool, but the difference is less extreme than it will become in later ages. The atmosphere and ocean currents distribute heat effectively, preventing any region from becoming too hot or too cold. The climate is mild and stable, without the swings that will characterize later periods when ice ages develop. volcanic activity has decreased from the intense levels of the planet's youth. Eruptions still occur, but they are less frequent and less massive. The crust has thickened and cooled, making it harder for magma to reach the surface. What volcanism remains is spread across many small vents, rather than concentrated in a few large ones, creating a background level of activity that is steady rather than punctuated. The ocean's chemistry has stabilised. The salinity is set, the pH is buffered by dissolved minerals, and the concentration of various elements remains roughly constant over long periods. The water is clear in the open ocean, allowing sunlight to penetrate to significant depths. Near the coast, sediment clouds the water, but even this is a regular feature, not a disruption. Coastlines have taken on familiar shapes. Bays and headlands repeat patterns determined by the underlying geology, with resistant rock forming promontories and softer rock eroding into embayments. The shapes are not permanent, but they are persistent, lasting for millions of years before erosion significantly alters them. River systems have carved their valleys and established their courses. The rivers flow in the same channels year after year, moving water and sediment from highlands to sea. The drainage patterns are mature, efficiently moving water without the frequent flooding and channel changes that characterize younger river systems. The atmosphere's transparency allows you to see the stars at night without obstruction. The sky is clear more often than not, with clouds forming and dispersing in predictable patterns. You can observe the full moon rising over the ocean, its light reflecting off calm water, creating a path of silver that reaches from horizon to shore. Tides continue their rhythmic rise and fall, but the moon is slightly farther from Earth now, and the tides are slightly less extreme than they were earlier. The change is gradual, a slow lessening of the moon's gravitational grip as orbital mechanics carry it farther away over millions of years. The tides remain strong enough to mix coastal waters and shape shorelines, but gentle enough not to cause disruption. Sediment accumulates on the ocean floor in regular layers, each one recording a particular interval of time. The layers are undisturbed in the deep ocean, far from the turbulence of currents and storms. They lie flat and parallel, like pages in a book, waiting to be read by anyone who learns to interpret them. The land surface has been weathered into soil in many places, with rock broken down into particles that can hold water and support the chemical processes that will later nourish plants. The soil is thin during these early ages, but it is present, a transitional layer between solid bedrock and open air. Clouds form in the same regions day after day, driven by reliable patterns of heating and evaporation. You can look at the sky in the afternoon and predict where rain will fall by evening, based on where clouds are building. The patterns are not rigid, but they are consistent enough to learn. The ocean's surface is calm between storms. Waves rise and fall with the wind, but when the wind drops, the water smooths into gentle swells that travel for hundreds of miles without breaking. The swells are regular, spaced evenly, and the product of distant weather systems that have already passed. The ocean carries memory in its motion, reflecting events that happened far away in time and space. Sunsets paint the sky in shades of orange and pink as dust and water vapour scatter the sun's light. The colours are vivid during these ages when the atmosphere is thick and volcanic. Dust adds particles to scatter light. You watch the sun descend toward the horizon, the colours shifting as the angle changes, until the sun slips below the edge of the world and twilight takes over. The transition from day to night is gradual, not abrupt. The sky remains bright for some time after the sun sets, then slowly darkens as the last light fades. Stars appear one by one, the brightest first, then the dimmer ones, until the full array is visible. The transition is gentle, giving the surface time to release the day's heat before the coolness of night fully settles in. You stand on a hillside as evening arrives, watching the landscape soften in the fading light. The temperature is dropping, but slowly, and the air is still. Below you, a river reflects the last of the daylight, a ribbon of silver winding through darker land. The planet is calm and settled, at rest in the way that a system at equilibrium can be said to rest, while still maintaining all its processes in perfect balance. You settle into the planet's darkness and discover that night is not absence but another kind of presence. The sun's light is gone, but other rhythms continue. The Earth turns eastward through its own shadow, and as it turns, the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, unchanging markers of the planet's rotation. The surface cools after sunset, releasing the warmth it accumulated during the day. The cooling is gradual, a slow return toward equilibrium with the surrounding air. Rock that was hot to the touch at midday becomes merely warm by midnight and will be cool by dawn. The heat does not disappear but radiates outward into the atmosphere, then upward into space, continuing the energy flow that began when sunlight first struck the surface. The atmosphere remains active at night. Winds continue blowing, though they often calm as temperature differences even out. Air that rose during the day now sinks, completing convection cycles that span 12 hours or more. The movement is invisible in darkness but no less real, redistributing heat and moisture across the landscape. Clouds that form during the afternoon may linger into the night, or they may dissolve as cooling air loses its ability to hold water vapour. When they dissolve, the moisture falls as dew or light rain, wetting surfaces that dried during the day. The water cycle continues in darkness, just operating through different mechanisms than it does in daylight. The ocean remains warmer than the land after sunset because water holds heat longer than rock. This temperature difference drives coastal winds that blow from land to sea at night, the reverse of the pattern that prevails during the day. The winds are gentle, but they persist through the dark hours, part of the daily rhythm that ties land and sea together. Stars provide a small amount of light, enough to distinguish sea from sky, enough to navigate by if you know their positions. The light is steady, unlike the flickering of flames, because stars are so distant that their light arrives as parallel rays, unaffected by any turbulence close to Earth. The starlight has travelled for years to reach this surface, and it arrives softly, without fanfare. The moon, when it's above the horizon, provides brighter light than the stars. During a full moon, you can see clearly enough to walk without stumbling, to watch waves break on the shore, and to observe the texture of rock beneath your feet. The moonlight is reflected sunlight, arriving second-hand but sufficient for the night's purposes. Tides continue to rise and fall regardless of whether the sun is up. The gravitational pull that drives tides does not depend on light, only on the positions of the moon and sun relative to Earth. A high tide arrives at midnight as reliably as one arrives at noon, bringing water up the shore and then withdrawing it, keeping the coastal zone in motion even while the rest of the landscape rests. Temperature-dependent chemical reactions slow at night as the surface cools, but other reactions proceed more readily in darkness or cooler conditions. The chemistry of the surface shifts in character from day to night, not stopping but changing its emphasis, allowing processes that cannot occur in heat or light to take their turn. The absence of sunlight provides a respite from ultraviolet radiation, which is more intense during these early ages before oxygen accumulates in the atmosphere and forms an ozone layer. Night offers protection from this radiation, a daily reprieve that allows chemical processes sensitive to UV light to proceed without disruption. Darkness creates gradients between surfaces that face the open sky and those that are sheltered. Surfaces that radiate heat freely to the night sky cool more than surfaces protected by overhangs or surrounded by other rocks. These temperature variations create microclimates at small scales, diversifying the conditions available for chemistry across the landscape. The planet's rotation ensures that night is temporary. No part of the surface remains in darkness permanently. Every location that experiences night will experience day again after a few hours, and the alternation continues without interruption, creating a rhythm that divides time into manageable intervals and provides both activity and rest in regular succession. You notice that sounds carry differently at night. Without the sun's heating creating turbulent air currents, the atmosphere becomes more stratified, and sound waves travel farther before dissipating. The crash of waves on a distant shore reaches you clearly. The rumble of a far-off volcanic vent carries across miles of open water. The night is not silent, but filled with the quiet sounds of ongoing processes. The stars move across the sky as the Earth rotates, rising in the east and setting in the west. Their motion is steady and predictable, completing one full circuit in approximately 18 hours during these early ages, when the day is shorter than it will later become. You can use their positions to track the passage of time, to know how much of the night has elapsed and how much remains. The ocean glows faintly in places where certain chemical reactions occur, producing light without heat. The glow is subtle, a pale shimmer on the water's surface, visible only in complete darkness. It is not biological yet, just chemistry that happens to emit photons as a byproduct, but it adds a gentle luminescence to the night sea. Cooling rock contracts slightly, and the contraction sometimes produces small cracking sounds, like the ticking of cooling metal. The sounds are occasional, not constant, but they remind you that the landscape is active even in stillness, that motion continues at scales too small to see but large enough to hear. The night sky is perfectly dark between the stars, unaffected by any artificial light, and clear enough to see the Milky Way as a band of concentrated starlight across the heavens. The darkness is complete and clean, offering contrast that makes the stars seem brighter by comparison. You lie on warm rock and feel the stored heat of the day rising through stone into your body. The sky above is vast and scattered with stars. The ocean murmurs at the shore. The planet turns eastward, carrying you with it, bringing the dawn that will arrive in a few hours when the rotation carries this location back into the sun's light. Night is balance, part of the rhythm that prevents the surface from overheating or overcooling, providing the alternation that makes stability possible. You watch the Earth maintain itself across millions of years through simple repetition. The same processes that operated yesterday operate today and will operate tomorrow. Water evaporates, condenses and falls. Rock erodes, sediment accumulates, and new rock forms. The planet does not innovate or adjust or intervene in its own cycles. It simply continues, letting physics and chemistry follow their rules without guidance. The reliability of these processes creates a kind of predictability that extends across deep time. The sun will rise tomorrow because the Earth will continue rotating. Rain will fall somewhere because the water cycle will continue operating. Tides will rise because the moon will continue orbiting. None of these outcomes requires any special conditions to be maintained, or any external input beyond what is already present. Erosion will eventually wear down every mountain that rises, returning the material to the ocean, where it will accumulate as sediment, be subducted, melt, and potentially rise again as new mountains millions of years later. The cycle is long, but it is reliable, and it ensures that the surface is constantly being renewed rather than wearing out. The atmosphere will continue to exist as long as gravity holds it in place, and volcanic activity continues to replace gases that react or escape. These conditions are stable, built into the planet's structure and composition, and not dependent on anything that might cease unexpectedly. The ocean will continue to exist as long as the temperature remains within the range where water is liquid. The Earth orbits the Sun at a distance where this condition is met, and the orbit is stable, maintained by the same gravitational forces that have held it for billions of years, and will hold it for billions more. Living organisms will eventually emerge from the chemistry that is already occurring in tidal pools and hydrothermal vents. When they emerge, they will find a planet that is ready for them, with water, minerals, energy, and stable conditions all available. The planet did not create these conditions for life's benefit, but simply by following its own processes, which happen to produce a habitable environment as a side effect. Life, once it begins, will participate in the cycles that already exist. Organisms will take in water and release it, take in minerals and incorporate them into structures, and capture energy and use it to build complexity. These are extensions of processes that already occur in non-living chemistry, just organised in ways that can reproduce and persist. The carbon cycle will incorporate living chemistry once life appears, but the cycle itself will continue operating on the same principles as before. Carbon will still move between atmosphere, ocean and rock, just with an additional pathway through organisms. The cycle will become more complex, but not fundamentally different. The planet's ability to maintain habitable conditions does not depend on life. The conditions existed before life appeared and will continue if life ever ends. Habitability is a product of size, distance from the sun, geological activity and atmospheric composition, none of which require biology to maintain. You notice that the Earth's stability comes from having multiple overlapping cycles, each one buffering variations in the others. If one process speeds up, another compensates by slowing down. If one reservoir fills, another empties. The system self-regulates through feedback loops that are built into the physics and chemistry, not added on as separate control mechanisms. Temperature stability comes from the ocean's thermal inertia, the atmosphere's ability to redistribute heat, and the planet's distance from the sun. These factors work together to keep surface temperature within a range that allows water to remain liquid, which in turn allows all the other processes to continue. Chemical stability comes from the buffering capacity of the ocean, which can absorb excess acids or bases without large pH changes, and from the slow cycling of elements through rock, which prevents any element from accumulating to toxic levels or depleting entirely. Energy balance comes from the match between incoming solar radiation and outgoing thermal radiation. The planet absorbs sunlight and re-radiates it as infrared, and the balance between these flows determines the surface temperature. The balance is not perfect at every moment, but it averages out over time to a stable state. The Earth does not rest, but it does not hurry either. It operates at the pace that its processes require, some fast like lightning, some slow like continental drift, all of them finding their natural rates without external pressure to speed up or slow down. The pace is suited to the scale, with fast processes handling small-scale variations and slow processes handling large-scale changes. You stand on a beach at dawn and watch the sun rise over the ocean, knowing that this same scene has played out every day for hundreds of millions of years and will continue for hundreds of millions more. The waves that break at your feet are driven by winds that are driven by temperature differences that are driven by the sun's heat. The chain of causation is clear, unbroken, and will continue operating as long as the sun shines and the Earth turns. The habitability of Earth is not a gift or an accident, but a consequence of how matter behaves under these particular conditions of size, composition, and solar distance. The planet became habitable by being what it is and where it is, and it remains habitable by continuing to be those things. There is no mystery in it, only physics and chemistry playing out across time, creating complexity through repetition, maintaining balance through circulation, and offering stability through the simple persistence of its cycles. You breathe the air, feel the warmth of the sun on your face, and listen to the waves, and you know that these experiences are possible because the Earth has spent billions of years preparing conditions where they can occur. The planet has done this work without awareness or intention, just by following the rules that govern matter and energy, and those same rules will keep it habitable as long as the fundamental conditions remain in place. The Earth continues, quiet and reliable, turning through its days and nights, cycling its materials, maintaining its temperature, simply being itself across the vast stretches of time.